Hey, all, happy Thursday. Welcome back to another live episode of Tech Backstage. I am joined today by Jonathan Curran, both at QCR Holdings, as well as Seraphim Logic. Jonathan, how you doing?
Doing well. How are you
Cool.
doing today?
I'm good, man. Thanks for taking the time to join us and talk about cybersecurity today. Excited to jump into the topic, talk about what's happening in the security sector. But first, I'd love to sit down and just hear a little bit more about your backstory and how you ended up coming to be in the security industry and also at QCR Holdings and Seraphim Logic.
Sure. So in my background, I've come from an IT administrative uh, area, more on the sysadmin, software service solutions, and I migrated over to the security side of the house. Formerly, I was the Fortune 100 CISO for Pearson. I've also worked for organizations like Logarithm, developing the advanced intelligence engine, working with their web UI and their SIEM product environment. And I've also worked as a cyber mercenary for a few years, uh, hunting down the bad guys on the offensive side of the house for the US DoD and developing curriculum on that set. Currently, I work over at QCRH. Um, right now, we manage a little bit over $10 billion worth of assets, and we're a financial institution, so we do quite a few acquisitions of banks, credit unions, and other fiduciary items. Then over on Seraphim Logic, do threat intelligence and a lot of R&D.
Cool.
So, yeah,
Good stuff. And so I guess first and foremost, QCR Holdings, uh, that's being in that space, that's a space that's ripe for people trying to attack vulnerabilities, being in the financial sector. I guess first and foremost, maybe diving in a little bit to what are some of the things that you guys are implementing on that side. I think backstage we were talking a little bit about the R&D that's going on. Maybe you want to kind of walk us through some of that really quick.
sure. So as everybody's talking about zero trust, that's great and all, but when we take a look at the DBIR, which is the Data Breach Investigation Report from Verizon from 2022, we see it's more of a human resource or vulnerability state. Because 60% of the data breaches occur from credential harvesting or from phishing email attacks. And also within the zero trust security architecture model, have identified a few additional gaps that developing technologies to be able to close those security areas. A few of them are like a polymorphic anti-quantum encryption framework. Uh, I also have a wireless spectrum analysis defense system that's active defense against threats in your environment, and also will pinpoint, try and get where they are within your physical environment and what type of technology or um, wireless tools that they're using to hack you. And yeah, and then just getting all the way down to a granular level in regards to endpoint security and be able to isolate the application stack and containerize it at a virtual level. So, yeah.
Cool. Let's take a couple steps back there because I think you're hitting on some acronyms and also on some more complex things that I want to just kind of dive into a little bit more. So first and foremost, can we talk about what zero trust is? And you're talking about the architecture. Like, what is zero trust?
So zero trust really comes down to identity access management and not trusting the end users in regards to doing the right thing or making the right choices. At the end of the day, the end user's actions, we don't want to hit the production environment. So we want to be able to isolate or those individuals or whatever type of bad behavior traits that they're exhibiting, not have it actually hit the production side of the house, and then we can actually remediate from the end user perspective.
Okay, cool. And then also, I had another question, just really quick. I think one of the things that you talked about was, and hopefully I'm saying this right, polymorphic encryption.
Yeah, so the polymorphic anti-quantum encryption framework,
Anti-quantum, got it.
yeah, it solves the weaknesses within asymmetrical and symmetrical encryption ciphers, and also it'll help protect threat landscape from quantum computing. So I'd be happy to talk more in depth on maybe our next round on that
Yeah,
item as
yeah.
well.
I think there's some questions I might have around that as we, maybe if we get to the end of the show and we have, a few extra minutes, because I think encryption's something that it's a very complex topic, and I think there's a lot of people, including myself, who probably could use a little bit better understanding of how it works and how it operates. But with that being said, I'd love to just kind of transition into the primary topic today. We're talking about cybersecurity, but the focus today is on the human factor, right? So, how do people affect your organization's security? I guess first and foremost, from your point of view, I think you already said that the DBIR, which is a report that Verizon puts out, it's the data breach investigation report, I believe, that they put out every year.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you had mentioned that the top two things that they highlight in that is credential harvesting and then also phishing attacks. I guess first and foremost, let's talk about the first one, just to get a better understanding. Credential harvesting, what is it, and how do I guess the bad guys, how do they facilitate these harvesting activities, and how do they actually get a hold of your credentials?
Sure. So there's two ways. One, data breaches. Obviously, that information's already been leaked on out. The darknet and the adversaries already know that information. And then two actually comes from the phishing side, trying to get end users to click on a link, open it on up, put in some credentials, make the web user interface look legitimate, whether it's Microsoft, Google, and be able to capture those credentials on the back end and send them back to the adversary.
Okay, but those, like, is one of the things that I saw, and I don't know if this is 100% relevant to what we're talking about too, but it's one of the things that I had seen the other day was talking about how the bad actors are able to gain access to an account, for example. Like I think in this case, they were talking specifically about Facebook and how they gain access to one account, send out messages via like Facebook Messenger, for example, like saying, "Hey, I need you to help me recover my password," and they're going to send a code to your phone or something, and then all of a sudden, by doing that, they gain access to another account, and it's kind of a spider web out, right? And I think that's, when you're talking about credential harvesting, I think that's one of the easiest ways for people to be fooled, because especially in the situation where, I think we all know that, like, there's those like King of Nigeria spam emails that are pretty easy to identify, and then there's also the ones on Facebook or emails that you get that are poorly worded or not. But the ones that are really dangerous are the ones that, somebody gains access to an account that you actually know and trust. They're able to actually communicate effectively in English, and make it sound like a sincere request. And that's like, that I think that's one of the more like potent ways that people are able to actually do the credential harvesting, because they're coming off as genuine, they're coming off as legitimate, and the person on the other end doesn't actually identify any sort of malicious behavior, right?
Correct. And the threat landscape for phishing has actually evolved quite a bit. So the attacks that I'm seeing from the bank industry side is they're trying to establish a level of trust. At the end of the day, if you trust them, then they know that it's going to be easier for you to be exploited. So a lot of these phishing email attacks that are coming on out that are more advanced aren't going straight ahead and saying, "Hey, click this link." Instead, it's saying, "Hey, I'm interested in doing business with you." You know,
Hmm.
getting that initial conversation going, establishing trust, and then saying, "Hey, I want to share some information with you. Here's a link. Here's an attachment," and going from there.
Yep.
Um, I've also had success in counter phishing. So last Christmas, I had somebody send me on over a fake job and they had sent on over a check. And what I ended up telling, they had requested, hey, do you mind taking a picture of the check for me and sending it on over? And I knew the scam like the back of my hand, and I had already notified the FBI and had them involved. But instead of actually just sending them what they wanted, what I did is I ended up setting up a host proxy where I would send them a link saying, here's the link to the image instead of just uploading an image. Sometimes they'll come on back and say, hey, I just want the image. And then from my perspective, from the bank side, I said, everything we do at the bank is established securely. So this is our standard operating procedure, is to share files through the secure file mechanism. So they'll click onto the link. When they click onto the link, they'll go over and they don't have access to privilege to it. Again, it's actually just like a fake JPEG that doesn't have the information that they're looking for, but I don't provide them permission. And there's a reason for that, because this goes into the second part of the social engineering technique. After they click that link and they go on over to that resource, this little pop-up that comes up saying, hey, to access this, accept the cookies, accept the information. And when they hit accept on that, it allows me to also get their geolocation. So now I have the browser that they're using, the operating system, what versions that they have, and now I have a geotag as well as IP. Now, from my point of view, a lot of times they'll hide behind a specific proxy, or they'll be using Tor networks to pivot the network communication off of. But the JavaScript that I embed into the website that pre-hits it actually runs locally and then calls on out to local resources. So even though they're trying to hide behind those network proxies to hide their identity, it actually provides me the forensic information I'm looking for. And then
Wow.
I can subsequently say, oh, hey, sorry, I set the wrong permissions. But now I already know what browser you're using, what operating system you're using, so then I can tailor a payload if necessary and attach it to it. So when they click it again, now that executes, and now I have control of their system.
Wow. That's pretty advanced. And I think I love the idea of the JavaScript being able to run locally and then actually then sending out a request from outside of like you said, the Tor network or the
Yeah.
VPN or whatever they're using. That's some pretty advanced tactics right there. That's cool. Just really quick, I one of the other things that I want to like kind of just circle back to is for those of us who don't know how to do that, what are some of the more effective ways for helping to kind of mitigate the risk that comes from these types of attacks?
Sure. The main thing is trust in identity, right? Knowing that the person that you're communicating with is the person that's on the other end. So, one, if you don't know who that person is or where that contact's coming from, I wouldn't trust it by default.
Yeah.
If the established relationship or a connection, sometimes you may want to kind of just add maybe a question that that person would only know between you and themselves. Now, if you have an internal attack vector where your best friend's the bad guy, or the person your colleague you work with is a bad guy, that's a different scenario. But about 90% of those tactics on trying to just avert or at least get a confirmation of identity will alleviate a lot of those issues.
Yeah. And I guess, so kind of expanding on that too is how do you as an organization as well, like the organization itself obviously has to have threat mitigation in place, for especially for larger companies like QCR, where you guys are in the banking financial space, and that's huge. But it doesn't start with the company, right? Like the company's not where the security line has to be drawn, right? It really needs to start with the individual. And so I guess, like, how do you as a company, going back to talking about how the human factor is like one of the largest, I guess you could call it, attack surfaces in an organization. How do you get the people to really be the front line to make sure that your company is secure, and making sure that people aren't clicking on these bad links or talking to these bad actors?
Sure. Oh, that's a good question. So there's actually two primary factors. One, which a lot of companies focus on, is on training. Training end users in regards to what phishing emails look like. Um, and so it creates that general behavioral trait of trying to think of within a security mindset, right? But on the other side of the house, or the flip side, everybody learns differently. So
Mhm.
I also teach as an adjunct professor at two different universities. And as I'm looking through the cybersecurity training curriculum that's put on out there, actionable feedback, making sure that you follow on up if they accidentally clicked on it, and putting that training out there, making it repetitive is great. But there's two additional factors that you may want to tie on into your phishing training, and one of them is an incentive. Why am I doing this besides, hey, I don't want to take another phishing training, right? I know one organization, what they do is that if you fail the phishing training, then they actually enable a secondary two-factor authentication that you have to use on your account. So to them, that's just additional hassle. It's an additional headache. So people become a little bit more focused, right? But I think what works more or better than the training side is enablement. How can we use the current technology and the knowledge set that we have today with our cybersecurity experts and embed that logic into your email, for example? To give you a little bit of context on that, what I'm looking at doing beyond just the general training and putting those security controls into place is taking it to the next step, doing linguistic analysis on the email, determining, hey, is there certain words or formatting that doesn't seem right? The other one is behavioral traits or user behavior for communication. You have an Exchange server that you have thousands or millions of emails that are going inbound or outbound. Taking that information and aggregating it to determine behavior of who they normally communicate with versus who they don't, then also attributing that to a security value. Now, taking the linguistic analysis piece, then tying it on into the user's behavior and communication patterns, and then adding a tertiary layer where you're scanning the email, grabbing the header information as well as the body of the email, and taking those links and scanning those links for a malicious threat from an attacker. Now, the current technology set, there's a lot of areas where there's bypasses. So sometimes when you click on that link, you're not going directly to that malicious content. Sometimes they'll go to a different website, and then that website will proxy you to the malicious content. So when it goes to scan that URL, that URL comes back as safe. So this method will take those URLs and IP addresses, and it spiders through that URL. So it won't stop just at the first link. It'll go 3 links deep and determine if there's any threat, not just on the original content, but also if there's threats within the content itself that it's providing. So now you have linguistic analysis, you have behavioral trait monitoring, and then you have a deep dive analysis on the URLs and the IP addresses looking for the malicious content. From those 3 values, you then take a logic structure and put a threat value to it and color code it. You say either, it's red, this is a known threat, or this is a threat, please report it, or yellow, this person you haven't spoken to, or maybe from the linguistic analysis piece, there's a few different words that aren't written correctly. So this could be a phishing attempt from maybe another country, or green saying that it's safe, and then putting that banner right up onto the top of the email. So not only do you have the enablement from a behavioral aspect where you're training the users not to click on the email, but now you also have a visual cue. Because
Mhm.
I don't know about other people, but myself, I get tens of thousands of emails a day, and there's no way that I can go through them and individually take my time to look for the security threats in each one. So that visual cue, whether or not it's safe or not, gives you a little bit of peace of mind. And then having that behavioral training and awareness piece definitely augments the scale of reducing your vulnerability from the end user perspective when it comes to a phishing attack.
Yeah. I don't get 10,000 emails a day, but I get probably, 100 or so. And it's even hard to go through that many. Right. And it's hard to know what you can trust and what you can't trust. There's one thing I kind of wanted to circle back to, because this is actually something that I have firsthand experience on, but talking about the training that companies give, um, I guess I can't help but feel a little bit like it's ineffective, right? It really feels to me like it's kind of an indirect step that you have to go through. It's almost like a box you have to check, right? They're going to send you the information. You're going to have to take some sort of quiz at the end, and you have to pass it. But like, at least for me personally, it doesn't really feel like the best way to go about, like you said, enabling people to be to be conscious of what's going on, right? I feel like they're just like you're talking about with enablement. There's a lot more that you have to do to empower people, to educate them, and sending them a PDF with some questions that they need to review, and then making sure that they choose the right multiple choice answer. Like, I don't think that that's really functional as a real world mitigation tactic right now, because things are changing so often, and you really have to be on your feet, right? And you really have to be able to learn to judge some of these things for yourself, right? Because you have to be able to understand, hey, this is something that's happening. The way that they do it's going to continue to evolve, and that quiz that you just took 6 months ago is probably going to be irrelevant pretty soon, right? So anyway, that's kind of like my personal experience working at large companies. And just because I think you have to be a lot more involved. You have to it's a continual process of improvement, right? It's a continual process
Well, yeah,
that's iterative.
and what you're trying to do is you're trying to take your average employee and then trying to put them into a security scenario trying to train them to become a security professional, but that's not their subject matter of expertise, right? And then, I think that's really where human capital management and the incentive piece comes into play, where, make it more fun.
Yeah.
Gamify it, have competitions between interdepartments, and whoever clicks on the least amount of phishing links, or if you get a perfect score for the year, put an incentive behind that. Is at the end of the day, that small incentive is going to save you a lot of money and a lot of headache.
Yeah. Do you have any, like, just out of curiosity, and I mean, we didn't talk about this before the show, so if you don't have any, it's okay. But is there any hard data around like how much these attacks cost companies on a yearly basis?
Um, there is. I know Gartner has quite a bit of information around the fiscal value. I don't know off the top of my head what the breach value is, but I know that on top of the fiscal side of what you lose, generally you can multiply that by 5 times. And from a public relations standpoint, that's about how much money or business you're going to lose.
Oh, that's brutal.
So,
So I got another question too, just kind of around threat mitigation. What do you think best practices are on not reusing passwords and using things like password vaults? Are those secure options for making sure that your credentials are safe, and to make sure that by not reusing passwords, it's harder to for somebody who gains access to one of your accounts to not gain access to other accounts?
so ideally, there's a few different key things that you want to take a look at when it comes down to passwords and authentication. So using a password vault is definitely better than saving it cached in your browser. You don't want to do that.
Right.
If your system gets compromised, they're going to scrape that information on out. But I'd say number one priority is setting up multi-factor authentication.
Yep.
Tying your phone, maybe you have an authenticator app. If you have an authenticator app, I suggest not using the same vendor. So if you're using Microsoft for Active Directory, I wouldn't use Microsoft's Authenticator. I'd use like Google Authenticator. That way you actually have two different vendors. They have two different sets of security. It's the same concept is, what you put on your DMZ for your firewalls. I usually never use the same make and model firewall because one exploit could potentially traverse to the second one. So why would you do that?
Mm-hmm.
The other item that you can take a look at when it comes to identity access management, and specific around maybe if you have an SSO application, is there's a few additional advanced steps. One is conditional access controls. You set the parameters of where users can authenticate from. Kind of like geo restrictions, right? If you're in the US, why would you be authenticating from China, Russia, Europe, Canada? And you can put geo restrictions there. The other thing that you can enable now is velocity tracking. So if I'm in Massachusetts and I authenticate, and maybe within an hour another authentication comes from California, is there any way that I could logistically have gone from point A to point B within that time frame?
Mm-hmm.
Most likely not. If you have a VPN, then you probably want to whitelist those specific IP addresses so you don't block yourself inadvertently. But those are just one of a few additional items that you want to take into consideration when you're looking at the authentication. Then you can tie it to certificates, and keep on going down as far down as you want. At the end of the day, I think passwordless authentication is going to be the end point of where we want to be. You get that one-time password, you put that one-time password on you set up the multi-factor authentication, now you don't have a password.
So just go into multi-factor authentication, no passwords.
Yeah, and then also putting the conditional access control rules where applicable.
Okay. I'm curious to understand what your thoughts are, and I 100% agree with you on the multi-factor authentication stuff. I think that it should just be standard practice nowadays. I know it's a little bit of an extra headache for all of us, but the extra couple seconds really do help making things more secure. Curious to understand your thoughts a little bit around the future of identity management, especially with all the buzz talk about Web3 and decentralized applications, and things like like crypto wallets living in your browser, and you really owning your identity. What do you think the future of cybersecurity, especially when we're talking about human behavior, but also what some of these decentralized applications look like as far as how we manage user identity?
Yeah, at the end of the day, still think it's going to wrap around the multi-factor authentication piece, who you are, what you have, what you know. But I think it's going to strip away more of the human aspect and try to just identify more from like a biometric standpoint on is that person really the person that's actually trying to access that specific type of content. And then taking a look from the cryptographic side, again, I can talk a little bit later on this, but processing identity access management securely I believe the paradigm is going to change on that front as well. So.
Very cool. Well, Jonathan, I think we're just about up on time. I wanted to just kind of circle back and just this talking about, like, so you were just talking about biometric, right? So I was actually using this on, I'm not going to mention where, but I've been starting to see that websites access like the biometric stuff that's stored on my device to authenticate. And so is that going back to kind of like some of the encryption and some of the features earlier on, are things like phones going to start becoming like our identity control, like you're talking about? I know we're talking about multi-factor authentication, but it's even getting down to the point now where it's like this is where you access stuff from, and you're actually able to verify with this device that it's you.
Yeah, currently it seems like the mobile devices are the king of the castle, right?
Yep.
And if you have access control to that, that's really where you're going to be able to leverage your next attack vectors. So I really hope on the mobile security side things continue to ramp on up. Smartphones haven't been around a long time. in a holistic scheme of things. So that there's a lot of additional vulnerabilities and threats that can be posed to it. But maybe even taking a look at having a specialized dedicated device just for that multi-factor authentication that's mobile, has that access, but doesn't allow you to actually have those additional applications and services that you want to use, like it could potentially pose additional threats. So
Yeah, I agree, and I think that I do really like. I mean, I'm a Mac guy, so I do really like the direction that they're going with. You know, especially around data and privacy. I think it's headed in the right direction. I think there's still a lot of work to go, and I think there's still a lot of improvements for sure. But I think it's slowly taking steps in the right direction.
yeah, absolutely.
Well, Jonathan, we are up on time. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and chat with us today about cybersecurity. Before we go, Carlos, do you have any announcements for next week?
Yeah, sure do, Eddie. Thank you. Well, next week, as you know, we have quite a few holidays, but we have two shows. Actually, the first one being on Tuesday. Right down below, you'll see the info. It'll be with Albert Saniger, the CEO of Nate.tech, which is a online shopping technology platform. And then on Wednesday, we'll be talking Steve Milo, the CEO of V-Trips, which is a travel tech company. That's what we have for next week, folks. So join us right here on Tech Backstage at 12 noon Pacific time, and be here or be square. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos, and thanks again, Jonathan, for stopping by.
Yeah, anytime. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, have a good day.
Bye.